In this episode of Woven Lives, we talk with one of the only remaining ash splint basket makers in the UK, Mateo. After studying an environmental management degree, specialising in environmental conservation, Michelle gained experience working in sustainable forestry, building cob houses and ovens, timber-framed cabins, yurts and outdoor structures. Michelle now works with sustainably sourced hardwoods, which have been coppiced as part of a woodland regeneration process from the outskirts of Bristol, Gloucestershire, and the southeast of Wales. Michelle works with 3 heritage crafts: bowl turning using a pole lathe, leatherwork, and ash splint basketry. At times she combines them for one piece of work, and the materials come together, creating a harmonious effect. The curved forms of her delicately woven backpacks are bound with hand-stitched leather straps, which sit perfectly like well-fitted braces across the repeat pattern of the woven ash strips. Her baskets contain carefully carved handles, which are delightfully named ear handles. They sit snugly inside the rim of the basket. A small carved notch keeps them secured into place. The forms she builds so beautifully with the ash splints vary from her bulbous belly basket to her sleek, narrow shoulder bags, perfectly rectangular shoppers, and her tiny square-bottomed round-top wall baskets. Michelle has been weaving ash splint baskets since 2013. The heritage of these baskets derives from North America, where logs from the black ash tree are pounded to separate and peel the annual growth layers from the log, requiring the maker to have physical strength and stamina. In the past, these baskets were made by First Nation people and then by European settlers who brought their own techniques and designs. Later, the shakers built machines to do the pounding and made moulds to standardise shape, which in turn produced high quantities of splint baskets. Michelle and her partner own 9 acres of land and have plans to develop it using the skills they have acquired, their aim being to help people reconnect with the environment and in turn protect it. Alongside her own making, Michelle teaches both ash splint basketry and pole lathe bowl turning for groups such as the Basketmakers Association, West Dean College, the Small Woods Association, and Tree to Treen. Michelle studied with Andrew Kirby and more recently attended Lorna Singleton's Wood Water Weave course in Cumbria, a year-long split wood basketry course which is now in its 2nd year. In 2022, Michelle's ash splint basket won first prize in the Basketry of the Year competition organised by the Worshipful Company of Basketmakers, and in the same year was awarded a bursary for Black and ethnically diverse trainees from the Heritage Craft Association. In 2023, Michelle exhibited twice with the New Craftsman, once as part of the London Design Festival, and again with the Natural Room at Decorex International. In 2024, her work was part of the 86 Baskets exhibition at Grisdale Forest, and more recently, 2 of her hazel baskets featured in the traditional basketry exhibition, Basketry, Rescuing, Reviving, Retaining, which has toured the UK and is currently at the Harley Gallery in Nottingham. Hello, Michelle. Welcome to Woven Lives.
Hello. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
Thank you for joining us. Can you explain how you first discovered ash splint basketry and what made you decide that you wanted to make these baskets for a living?
This is a question I get asked a lot, and it was all just an accident. When I first went on the course, I was actually volunteering at a woodland project called the Cherrywood Project, which is between Bath and Bristol. And Tim Gatfield, who runs the project, he gets lots of volunteers to come and build stuff on the land, and people get experience in that way. And part of supplementing the income is to hold courses, like green woodworking courses and stuff like that. So my friend Andrew Kirby, he had one space left, and as a treat to myself for just finishing uni, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll come on the course. And I always tell my students this as well when they learn. The whole weekend I was so frustrated and so angry because I just didn't know what I was doing. I've never made a basket before then. And I didn't really know what pieces I was making. I didn't really understand what the end goal was. So, and then when I finished weaving the basket, I was like, oh my God, there's a basket. I love that. And I wanted to do the process again. So I just wanted to do it again, but being a lot more relaxed. And I just started doing it on my own. And then I tried to research a lot more, and I couldn't find anything about it in the UK. And that's when I realised it was made, like the technique comes from America. So I had to just learn on my own. And then because of all the networks through the Cherrywood Project, word had gotten around that I did them, and I got asked to do demos. And then from that, people asked me to do classes. And then from then on, it kind of was a word of mouth where people just got to know I was doing it. And then it just ended up being full time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
That's
crazy.
amazing.
It wasn't supposed to be, when I went on the course, it wasn't supposed to be a conscious decision of me saying, yes, I'm going to do this full time. It was just over the years, I'd asked myself, what is my skill set? How can I be more self-reliant and independent? And that was just on the list.
So what kind of splint basketry were you making to begin with?
Really simple baskets. So I was doing what they would call a square bottom basket to a round top. And I just kept doing that for a long time. And then variations of that. So then it was more rectangular bottoms, going to more shaped like D tops. And then I started adding leather work to that. And then just trying to do more traditional forms, because that's all I had access to at the time, because I didn't really have the knowledge to be more creative. So that's what I focused on, is like the stuff that I could find in books.
So you were already doing the leather work before you started basket making?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It was like one of the first things I made. And it used to be really good because everyone I knew was already into woodworking. So it made sense for me to do leather sheaves and leather products. But it was, I think, in terms of craft, when you're starting to learn, it was really expensive to decide to spend all that money on leather. So for me, in terms of accessibility, I really wanted something that I could get for myself at a lower cost, without having to put a strain on myself financially.
So you said your first teacher was Andrew Kirby. Can you tell us more about him and what did you learn from him?
Andrew Kirby is incredibly talented, and he's the kind of person that whatever he decides to do, he's incredibly good at. So he was he was the apprentice at the Cherrywood Project a few years before I volunteered and met the Cherrywood crew. But before that, he was a violin maker, or he had gone to university to be a violin maker. So that's the kind of level that he is at, where he does really fine work, but very accurate. But yeah, he'd only been doing ash splint baskets for a year before he taught me. But you could never tell that he'd only been doing it for a year. So he was really good, really quick. But he then moved on from baskets, and then he became a grower for a while. But also he's been managing a coppice at the Cherrywood Project for so long now as well. One of the best things that I've learned from him is that you can pick anything up, and if you spend enough time being dedicated to something, you can be really good at it. It's not something that it can be learned, having these skills. It's not just, it's a natural thing. You can see the way he analyzes things and the way he recreates everything. He's very precise. And I think that's a good thing to learn, is like, it's all about practice when you want to get better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have to put the hours in.
Yeah, because I think especially when you teach a lot and you have students that are not as confident and they're like, I thought I would be really good at this, or I thought it would be easy. It's like you have to remind them you've never done it before, and you might not have even picked up a knife. So not only are you learning how to weave a basket, but you're also learning how to handle a knife safely. You're also learning like 10 different tools at the same time. So I think it's a good reminder to be like, you might not be the best, but you do have to start somewhere.
And can you tell us a bit more about did you call it the Cherrywood Project?
The Cherrywood Project.
So what's the Cherrywood Project?
It's the woodland project. So it's all about sustainable woodland management, but in small forestry kind of scale. So everything is largely done by hand. There's no machinery. And part of it is like increasing biodiversity in the woodland. So it used to be an old plantation. So it used to be just lots of non-native, but it used to be lots of trees planted for paper. So you can imagine it just used to be a big monoculture. But now there's just so much more of like broadleaf woodland that's been planted. And part of that was green woodworking courses. So Tim Gatfield is a woodworker, so he does a lot of like chair making, and before that he used to be like a cabinet maker. So again, another kind of precise way of doing it. So part of supplementing that is they used to do green woodworking courses. So the chair making course used to be a 5-day course, and people would come and camp in the woods. But it was also a chance for people to do a skill share. So I think one of the first things he built there was like the compost loo. And it was, so everything at that project has been made by volunteers. And you can really see the amount of love that's gone into it and the amount of structures. So that's the main project. And then it's 40 acres of woodland. And I think half of that's coppice as well. So it's hazel coppice. So yeah, it's just a huge place where you can do lots of skill exchange, woodland related.
And is this in your area, in the Monmouth area?
No, this is in Bath East,
Okay.
in between Bath and Bristol. So I used to live in Bristol for like 10 years, and that's how I know of the project.
It just goes to show how important those places are, to engage people and to get people interested in craft and into sustainability and forestry. Like without those kind of places, we wouldn't have people like you now making splint baskets, would we?
Yeah, definitely in the southwest as well. If you've ever said, oh, have you ever been to the Cherrywood Project? If you're a woodworker, most people have been there or had volunteered or know someone who's been. So Tim Gatfield is semi-retired, but everyone keeps in touch, and we all do keep tabs on each other and check in. So it's really a really beautiful project. But you can really see the network of people that have crossed paths. And that's sometimes like when you get work, it's normally through someone you know through Cherrywood, or definitely for me. So yeah, it's a really, really good space for people to come and focus. But also, I think for me, it was really important because I really wanted to get into woodland management, and there weren't many places that I could do the kind of thing that I wanted to do. So it was a really good place to go get experience. So I was probably there for about 7 years. Yeah.
Sounds like they're very supportive as well.
Yeah, Tim Gatfield is great. So everyone was really sad when he's semi-retired, but he was like, no, I've done my job, because now everyone I've taught has gone off and done their own things.
Yeah,
and he's like planted that seed. And he's also shown people a different way of life. So he was living there with his family in his beautiful yurt. And I think that's really important to show people how they can live differently. And I think that was a big inspiration for a lot of people living, especially when we all lived in the city and came to the woods.
And so, apart from the Cherrywood Project, can you tell us about any makers that inspire you?
Yeah. Jeremy Frey, he's a really big ash splint basket maker in America, and his stuff is so beautiful. So when I first started trying to research and find out different makers, he was one of the first that I came across. And when I saw his stuff, I was like, oh, okay, I have to practice a lot more to get up to that level. But I want to say he's 17th generation basket maker of the family. So his history runs really deep, and you can see that reflected in his work because it's so precise and so unique. It's really beautiful.
Oh, incredible. And can you tell us a bit more about the history of he does black ash basketry,
Yes.
is that right?
Yeah.
So why is that different from the splint ash basketry that you do?
I haven't had the chance to work with black ash, so for me, I guess the only difference is the type of tree that we're using.
Okay.
So I use common ash, which is abundant in Europe, and in North America they have several different types of ash. So they've got green ash, black ash, white ash, pumpkin ash, blue ash. There's probably a few more that I can't think of at the moment, but they have much more varieties. But speaking to basket makers that have worked with black ash, they say it's the best material to work with.
And so do you know how the traditions of that black ash basketry came about in North America?
No one. It's like one of those histories that no one can really pinpoint at what point they figured out they could use ash in that way. So, for anyone listening, when you find a log, you need to pound it, and that the growth rings start to delaminate. And I don't think there's any history of that point when it was discovered. So, in my head, someone's figured out how to do that because they must have used a bit of ash as a mallet and must have used that mallet time and time again and start to realise that it started to delaminate. But yeah, it's a huge part of First Nations history because it was one of the few things to survive European settlers coming over and trying to control and suppress their culture. But basketry was one of the few ways they could adapt to living in the new kind of ways without losing part of their culture. So a lot of their stuff used to be banned, like their dancing. But basketry was one of the few ways they could work the land and not be so reliant on European income.
Okay, interesting.
Mm.
So I also read about the Shakers then coming over and mass producing these baskets, and they were doing that. So were they taking designs from First Nation people and then mass producing those, or do you think they had their own designs?
I think they had their own designs because when you look at some of the splint basketry in Europe, there is like an overlap. But I don't know if it's that thing of where two ideas can be independently thought of and you both have your own ideas. And then once you cross cultures, you're like, oh, we've just figured out the same thing in a different style. So it's really hard to gauge like what came first, but was it one of those situations where actually we all need vessels? How else can we do it with flat, straight pieces?
And there's also that I heard someone else talk about it before, it might have been Mary Butcher. There comes a point where there's a limitation about what you can do with that material. So that's how you get the crossovers, even if you're on the other side of the world.
Yes.
You know, those people have experimented with that material so
for
much
so long
that they've almost come to similar conclusions with it.
Yeah.
Which is quite amazing. So what I wanted to ask you, I'm really interested about, I've always been confused about the splint ash basketry, so splint basketry and split wood basketry. So could you explain the difference between those?
I guess I would say they're interchangeable. I wouldn't say there's that much of a distinction, but I would say splint. Yeah, I think it's more of just it's interchangeable because a splint is a slither of wood by definition, but I guess split wood is more specific to the process. So I would say splint is more an overall term for the kind of material you get off, but the split stuff is specifically to one type of wood that you've processed.
Okay.
So for me, I would say oak is more split wood because you are forcing that to split. So for those who don't know about oak splint basketry, oak is done in a totally different way to ash. So you make billets from green oak and then you boil that for 24 hours. And then once that's done, you split it in half and half and half and half again until you've got these woven bands. So you are splitting it in half. And the reason why that process is so different is because with oak grain, it's interlocking grain and it doesn't naturally want to be split in two. And compared to ash, it's when you've already started pounding it, you're working with the grain and the weakness in one direction to your advantage, and you're it doesn't have the interlocking grain, so that's why it's more of I would say it's more of a splint because you're not always splitting it.
When I've worked before with Owen Jones and tried to split oak from out of the hot bath of water, that is really hard work. So there's a friction to that, isn't there? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the interlocking grain because oak is strong in both directions. So that's why it feels like you're fighting it with oak. Whereas with ash, you're kind of definitely peeling off those layers and you're kind of breaking up the winter growth, which is why you're just left with the hard summer growth. It's a really different process for each kind of wood actually in splint wood basketry. So with something like chestnut, it's another process again where you're also using fire, but you're kind of heating it over a long fire that is the length of the pole that you're cutting. And that has to be green with the bark on. And once you see that the liquid starts to spit at the end, it's hot enough to then split in half and half and half until you get those thin slivers. So that's unique. And then with hazel, it's a different process as well. So when you do hazel, you're bending small rods, but you're making a little cut notch into them and bending it over your knee to get off these splints. So it's all really unique processes for each wood.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because how did people work that all out, that you have to treat each type of wood completely differently to make it split? It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes me wonder if it's something boat related, like making boats and that kind of thing. But yeah, I really don't. It's fascinating to know that someone boiled oak at some point for 24 hours and was like, oh, I'm going to see if that wood's really viable. But then it might have been something to do with the tannins in oak. Maybe they were doing it for the bark with the wood still in, and that's maybe how they did that.
So yeah, that's really fascinating because even if you think about just like 100 years ago when there were so many people making, and your parents would have been making and your grandparents before that, and there was like an ancestral line where each family was passing on a trade or a technique to the next family. And so there was like you were naturally learning from the generation before you, and now we've lost that, haven't we, in a way, completely, because there's hardly anyone making anymore. So all these skills that we would have had, which everybody would have naturally done, it's a real shame, isn't it, that we now have to struggle. We have to go to a course or something to learn how to do it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because I went to Romania to learn to do a bit of hazel basketry. And when I told them that I had like basically taught myself after like a 2-day weekend, they were like, that's so fascinating because it's normally your parents that tell you. It's normally a family tradition that you pass on. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point, because how else would you have known the knowledge and got all the tricks without someone showing you for years and years and years? But that's a part of why splint basketry is endangered in the UK and is at risk of being lost in the next few generations, because when we look at hazel basketry as a historical basket as part of the UK, there's so many donations to rural museums of hazel basketry because it used to be so abundant. But they were saying it's after World War II, where the men had gone to war and weren't managing the coppices, that we lost that skill because obviously they died in the war and they hadn't passed that on to the next generation. So with hazel basketry, we've had people have put a lot of effort into learning these techniques that we were lost. So like Ruth Pybus, she was quite a big person to kind of bring that back to the UK, and you can see how she's linked to Lewis Goldwater and Lorna Singleton of passing on these skills that she'd developed, and now Lewis is a full-time teacher, and so is Lorna, both doing like for example, the Welsh Whisket.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I would really love to talk about the course that you did with Lorna. Your baskets from the course Wood Water Weave were exhibited at Gwisdale Forest in the exhibition 86 Baskets. And I love that concept. On the poster it says 3 trees, 8 makers, 12 months. And it's incredible that the students used just 3 trees to make 86 baskets. So can you tell us more about the course and the exhibition, and how did this course benefit your work?
That is a good point. So we technically used more than 3 trees, but it was 3 types of trees. So our focus was oak, ash and hazel. And part of the reason for me was to go on the course was to learn other materials that are in my local area. So especially with ash dieback being so prominent, I was like, I should probably learn other things in my environment, like local area, and my local history, just in case ash ever does die back that far that I don't have a viable business anymore. So that was part of the inspiration for me to go on the course, was to learn these things, but also to learn more of UK history baskets. But my biggest take from that actually was learning how to be free with my weaving. So what I said earlier about me just learning traditional forms, because that's all I had in books, the course really gave me a chance to try things that I wasn't able to learn on my own, and it gave me so much more freedom to play with shapes. And one of the best things about the course as well was actually the other people I was on the course with. So in my head, I was like, it's business development. I'm just going to learn skills and I'm going to develop my business. But actually, it was all about the people that made it. So I had a really beautiful group of people, and it was great to just talk baskets nonstop for a few days. And I think the best thing about that course was having such a big not fountain of knowledge for a whole year. So it wasn't just Lorna. She had guest tutors, which was really great about the course. So we had Lewis Goldwater, who taught us the Welsh Whiskets. I taught the Ash Month. And then we also had Lorna, of course, teaching us hazel, other hazel basketry, so more Romanian style baskets and Eastern European style. And then we also had Owen Jones as well. So we had, having access to that many tutors within a 12-month span is really inspiring. And you get to see different styles and different teaching methods, I think, as well, which is really interesting, because when you're a full-time basket maker, there's definitely a part of you that makes income from teaching. So it was really good to see how other people presented ideas and explained ideas. And that was also like a bonus bit for me to learn, is just how can we convey this information to other people who think in different ways.
And it feels like having your exhibition at Gwisdale Forest was like the perfect setting to exhibit all your work at the end.
Yeah, because it's so easy when you make a basket once a month to just put it aside and be like, that's one basket I've made. So to have them all together, and it was really beautifully done. To see that a year's worth of work collectively in one room, it was just really humbling. And it was just really reassuring that we were all on this journey together. So it was really beautiful. And hopefully at some point we'll get it to Scotland.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
So
we're hoping
yeah.
to like do more of like a touring basket, but we would love to have it shown in other places as well.
That's a fantastic idea. I don't think do you think there's ever been that many split wood baskets on show at one time?
I
Before?
don't think there's ever, now that you've said that, no.
Yeah.
I think it's a real privilege to have had them. And one of the really nice things when I went to go visit the exhibition is there were so many people popping in and talking about their parents or their grandparents, and they used to have this basket. And it was a really good jumping point for people to talk about their families and really old memories, especially of them using the baskets. Like, oh, my dad used to work on the farm and he had one of those and he used it all the time. And I don't know where it is now, but I'm sure we've got it somewhere. So these really heartwarming stories that like really invoked happy memories for people. That was another bonus of having a space where people can come and remember.
Great. That's such an achievement. That's lovely. So changing the subject, I'd like to talk more about how you find the perfect ash log. So how do you harvest the ash, and how do you make sure that you've got the right log?
I never cut the tree down myself, I have to confess. I always get my friend Red or my partner Charlie to go get the log for me. So they're both really well versed in woodworking and forestry. So I would say they're both foresters, but also they've worked the land for long enough. And I have also worked with wood for long enough to know exactly what I need. So my friend Red, he owns a woodland in Hereford. And generally he knows what I'm looking for. But if I tell students what you need a tree that's healthy, ideally. And you kind of want like a minimum of like 6 to 7 inches in diameter. And if it does have ash dieback, where it starts in the canopy, usually the trunk is still viable because it hasn't travelled that far down the trunk yet. So for anyone listening who doesn't know what ash dieback is, that's a fungus that infects the tree and essentially kills it very slowly over time. So if you cut a tree down and you kind of see any discoloration in the timber, that usually means the ash dieback's gone too far. And I would say if you're looking to find a tree, that you should avoid that kind of thing. But a good sign of a tree to use is its moisture content. It should still be quite moist when you've cut it down. And also how fast it's grown or how slow it's grown dictates whether or not you want to spend time actually pounding it. So if it's got really tight rings, then it's really slow grown and it's probably thinner than a fingernail. It's not worth your time because that's way too thin to weave with anyway. But if it's fast grown as well, that's also really hard work because you're essentially pounding a really thick bit of wood. So there is a really fine line between finding the right log and the right kind of growth. But ideally straight and not free would be the perfect tree to use.
So I was going to ask you about ash dieback. Is this been affected by global warming or the climate crisis, or is it part of that, or have you seen an increase in ash dieback more recently?
So ash dieback, it travels in spores, so it could have naturally come here like over 30 years ago, but there's heavy suspicion that it came on imported ash saplings. So I guess when I started working in woodlands or volunteering in woodlands that time, like 12 years ago, you could definitely see it prominent in a lot of spaces. And I've definitely seen it spread from like southeast to the southwest and then slowly up north because where it's getting warmer, where the climate is changing, the kind of environmental stresses on trees makes it really rife for ash dieback to thrive. So, for example, drought or mild winters, any kind of flooding, anything that puts stress on a tree, that is perfect conditions for ash dieback to really get in there and infect a tree. So I've definitely seen it infecting new areas, but in places that I've seen for a long time, it's also come back. So I don't think it's a lost cause. I think we just need to let as many trees as we can build a resistance to it instead of culling everything out. So this is an interesting point that I made with the students earlier, is people think they're being really drastic and cutting down loads of ash. But I think they're only really cutting down ash in public spaces where it's more of a liability to hurting people. Most people want to leave it where it is and see if it has kind of that natural resistance over time. So I don't think maybe I'm just really optimistic, but I like to think that it will fight back.
Okay, so what we could hear then was a group of students in our field today, and they took it in turns, those 3 people at a time. They had rawhide mallets, and they were pounding the log for around about 3 hours. And can you explain how that process enables you to obtain splints of ash?
Right, so my log is about 8 to 10 inches in diameter, with a 2 meter length. So with the log, when you start pounding, you take the inner bark and the outer bark off. And I take that off with the draw knife, which is the long blade that you pull towards you, trying to avoid cutting the wood. And then you methodically, so the log is placed on a sawhorse, and you methodically pound the top of the log, which ends up being about 2 to 4 inches wide, depending on how curved the log is. And you pound that methodically until the growth rings start to delaminate. So if you picture in your head the growth rings at the end of the log, if you imagine the outermost layer of the year, the first year on the outside, if you imagine a small section of that breaking off, you follow that all the way down the length of the 2 meter log, and that is what we describe, or what we are describing as, an ash splint. And so once you've got that, you keep going around. So you complete 1 year and you keep going around and around. So if you're strong enough and you've got your muscles and your stamina in, you can do a few years at a time. But generally when you're first starting out, you do 1 year at a time, and you go round and round, and almost like an onion, you peel those layers back along the whole length of the log. So once you've got that, you should have strips that are about 2 meters, because where you work the log and all the shock travels through the further down the log, it makes the next layer a lot easier to peel. So once you've taken one off, you can see the next layer coming off, and it is this really addictive thing of like, oh, that one just needs a little bit more pounding, I'm going to keep going. And before you know it, you've spent 3 days pounding a log, and then you need to go lie down somewhere.
And what else was really nice that I thought was it was like a community activity. So everyone was chatting, everyone was quite relaxed doing it, taking it in turns. Some people were helping to do other jobs like pour the water over. It was a really nice group activity, wasn't it? It had a great feeling of everybody working together.
Yeah, it's a real community project, because there's a really well-known family in North America called the Pigeon family, and there's a really good YouTube video of them. And they have their whole family there as an activity to do one log together. So you'll have people pounding, then you have people cutting the splints to the right size and doing the knife work, and then you have different members of the family weaving. So when you watch that video, it's a really beautiful way to see actually doing it on your own is really hard work, because it is supposed to be done with other people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so once you've chosen your like perfect ash log, and that's been harvested and cut down. Can you just then describe the making process that goes into creating an ash splint basket?
So once you've pounded them, you then have to grade the splints into their thicknesses. So where I was talking earlier about the different growth rings being different thicknesses, if it's slow grown or fast grown, you kind of grade it by that. So when I say grade it, you have different components of the basket. So the base and the walls, we call them uprights, and you want them to be the strongest bit of the basket. And then you have the weavers, which hold that all in place. And then you have the rim, which finishes the basket. So in some places they call the uprights the bones and the weavers the skin. And that kind of gives you the idea of like the difference in thicknesses between the different parts. So once you've got that done, I then use leather lace cutters to then cut the pieces, and that helps me to do several at a time. So for anyone who isn't by a computer right now, who can't look at an image of one, leather lace cutters is just a device where you've got several Stanley blades sandwiched together, and they're set at uniform spaces. And I use them in my hand manually to go along the splint to cut them to the regular sizes. And then once I've done that, I'll use a carving knife to take off the material and make the wood look a lot smoother and a lot neater. So you've got the raw kind of textured edge, which has, I guess, hair-like bits, flat hairs. But the knife just gives it a nice visual, tidy look. But you don't have to do that. That's just part of my process. So if I'm working wood as well, if I need to work it, I'll always soak it in hot water for 20 minutes, which is a bit of a contrast to willow because you don't have to pre-plan. You can just do it there and then. And then once I've prepared it all, then I just weave the basket.
Okay.
And yeah, because you're working with it damp, you let it dry out before you finish the rim. And then you lace the rim in and you're finished.
So there's a lot of preparation work before you actually start weaving.
Yeah.
Tons of work first, almost like a day's work before you start weaving with your strips.
Yes, I always say to students on a course, it's 90% prep and then 10% weaving, because actually, you do so much from log to basket. The weaving is probably just the last hurdle before you actually have a finished product.
And you're using, would you call it a check weave? The type of technique that you're using to hold the splints together?
Yeah, check weave or basic weave. I say basic weave for the sides at least, check weave for the base. But I always say it's basic weave because it makes it easier for people to learn that it is just one over, one under, one over. So that's how I would describe it.
And how would you describe the way you make that beautiful rim? Would you call that a sandwich border? Or do you have a special...
Oh, I don't have a specific name for that.
Okay, right.
I just say it's the inner rim, the outer rim, and then you bind it.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a technical term that I haven't learnt yet, but hopefully I'll learn when I go to America at some point.
And you fit in the ear handles. They fit in so beautifully into that rim, don't they? That's why you carve that little notch in, is that right?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful traditional design. To think that far, 2 steps ahead to put the notch. So when you make a handle with ash, definitely with European ash, you have to steam bend the handle with 1 piece of carved ash. And once you've bent that round, you need to carve in the little notch which the rim sits onto. And it's really good because once you've bound that in, there's no chance of it coming out.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely one of my favourite things to make.
I was going to ask you what your favourite techniques are. Do you have any things that you just love making or techniques that you love using?
My favourite technique, definitely to show people, is when you half a splint into 2 pieces. So In green woodworking, you would call that cleaving, and that means to do a controlled split within wood. But I call it splitting the splint. And essentially, if you imagine that the one piece of splint in your head is 1 year's growth, what you do is you score to about 6 months. So you're scoring that piece, and then you split that into 6 months. So then you get these 2 slithers of ash. And where you've split it, you get this really beautiful satin finish, and it's really shiny and really beautiful. So that's one of my favourite techniques.
Very satisfying.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful process, and people think it's really hard, but when they have a go, they get really addicted and they just really want to keep splitting it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you made this huge bulbous basket called the belly basket, which I absolutely love. It's gorgeous. I can't remember the measurements for this, but it's like almost a meter in diameter.
It's huge, and the design is, so in pictures you can't actually see it, but the bottom is based on like the withy lobster pots.
Oh, nice.
So the base isn't flat, it goes actually inwards, curves up into like a concave kind of hill. And then it comes out into this big bulbous circle. And then from above, it kind of looks like you're looking at an iris. So it's I really love that form. And it was just, taking the design from the withy pots and then using the ash splint to do it. It was really a really nice process. And also, again, because I've learnt so many traditional forms, it was such a nice chance to play around with something I don't usually do.
Yeah, it works so well with the material. And you've got like perfect symmetry. That must have taken you a long time to get that. Those perfect side walls, they look gorgeous.
That is really kind, because it took me so long. And I always say, actually, when we do round baskets, that they're probably the hardest form to do without a mould. Whereas like where I teach the square baskets, everyone knows what square looks like. But when you teach the round baskets, you have to look at the form from above and then from the sides. And it's really hard to get that symmetry 360 degrees around the basket. So it's more challenging to learn a round bottom basket. But when you get it right, it's the best.
Yeah, it looks gorgeous. Well done. And finally, this is a question that we ask all the people that we've interviewed. So that the next generation of basket makers can be acknowledged. And what advice would you give to someone starting out on their career as a basket maker?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make a lot, and that's normal. And that's part of what makes you a better maker. And also, if you ever want to get into teaching, that helps you a lot to explain the processes to someone else, because you know how you've gone wrong and you know how to teach someone how to prevent it. That is my main advice, is to just embrace making mistakes, because at some point when your baskets do become very pretty and uniform, you might actually think it's a bit very ordinary. Mm-hmm. You want something that's a little bit more unique. So I think embrace the mistakes. And also my best advice is to constantly be experimenting. So when you first start out, I think you get stuck in traditional forms because that's the easiest one to learn and everyone knows them. But I would always say take time, make time to put aside just having free time to play and make your own designs. Because once you get full time into be basket making, whether it's a hobby, it's really easy to get stuck into like habits.
Yeah, thank you. That's great advice. And thank you so much for the interview. It was really fascinating. I feel like I've learnt loads by listening to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.